So there are a number of questions to be completed. Again, it'd be great if we could get your feedback. As panel getting set up, can I thank Samantha McCarroll and Greg O'Boyle for joining. You saw Greg on screen talking on the two videos this morning and this afternoon. He farms Randallstown with his father. They're in sheep production and growing extra silage for B&B of beef cattle. Samantha, dairy farming along with her husband down Fintona direction, herd of 90 cows, focus on spring calving and growing and utilising as much grass and forage as possible. I know we're tight for time, and I know from Slido there's a lot of questions that have come forward. We will give the opportunity for just a couple of questions from the floor, anything that really wants to come forward. But thanks indeed to the panel, and I'll start off by asking some of the questions that have come forward here. There was one, David Taro. We've been told there's more growth at the shoulders of the year. Has that been quantified to say what does that actually relate to tonnage-wise currently and potentially then going forward?
Is this on? I think the prediction is about 1.8 tonnes over this next, from now to 2100, and the distribution of that is more biased towards that April into May period, and then again the October into November period, with no predicted massive increases in the midsummer.
Yep. Brendan, question for yourself. A lot of people here interested because you're involved also with Ballyhaise and probably soil type, more typical of what we would find here. How did you oversow on Ballyhaise, and what were really some of the reasons for success?
So it's an iron-box seeder is what we were using. So it's just an air seeder scratching the surface. So graze out in April, you're scratching the surfaces, putting in the seed just very lightly in the soil, applying slurry and rolling. That's it, very simple. 50% of the time it worked perfectly. It just depends what the following 7-8 weeks are like. If it's very dry or if it's very cold, it's all about competition. If the grass is doing well, it'll struggle. If the grass isn't doing so well, it gives the clover a better chance to establish. So I'd like to say we could predict the outcomes, but really it's down to half of it is down to chance, But it's a cheaper way of doing it, I guess. For a farm that has no clover, it's an opportunity to get some clover in there, but it's not the same as full establishment, I guess, in terms of clover contribution long term.
Greg, question for yourself, just on the same thing. How do you go about establishing clover on your farm?
Generally a full reseed. We've never really tried the stitching in. With sheep grazing, we would have like a dense sward, so I don't believe it would be effective. So we just go for a full reseed, plough and power harrow and disc or whatever.
Taro, one for yourself here. In forecasting grass yields up to 21 to the year 2100, what impact of disease associated with climate change, particularly in suppressing yields, have been considered? So as things possibly get milder, wetter, warmer temperatures, are we more likely to see diseases in grassland, and is that taken into account?
In terms of the weather?
On the grass, on what potential grass? So will that suppress grass yields, the increase in diseases that may come forward?
Yeah, I think 2 points. It probably hasn't been factored into the model prediction, but I think it is a real issue. Having said that, as we gradually warm up over the next number of decades, there will be opportunity for those various diseases that we traditionally only saw maybe in the southeast of England. Some of those could creep across into certainly parts of Southern Ireland and eventually in Northern Ireland as the climate shifts. So we will have to be aware of those diseases, and maybe that's another challenge to the plant breeding community in the audience. We need to be not only screening the varieties of grasses and clovers and everything else here, but we need to be casting our eye across to maybe what's happening in the north of France in those same trials.
Well, David, leading on, there's a question here. With milder winters, is it time to look at New Zealand grass varieties?
Yes, and we already are.
So that's something that comes
It's
forward.
back to that spring productivity issue. David Johnson, who's here somewhere, brought over New Zealand strains back maybe in the early 90s and evaluated them. We had harder winters then, and the grasses fell over in our winter. But with milder winters as we're in right now, I think there's an opportunity to relook. In the same way I was relooking at the Italians and hybrids, we should be looking at those far field strains as well.
Can I follow up on
Yes.
that? So there was a question about the current model, and the results I showed today is based on today's cultivar, basically the cultivar against which we calibrated the model between the 2000 and 2020. But we are looking at changing the phenology parameters for a different part of the season, so that we know that we can actually improve the performance of the future growth by focusing more on the early season growth, as David said. So we are working with our breeding team to pass on that information. And there is also a question about the overwintering, the winter growth. And at the minute, even at the year 2100, we only see at most a few hundred kilograms of the growth. So that means that it's not really usable in the practical sense. But then again, if we change the cultivar or if we go hybrid, as David mentioned, then there may be opportunity to utilize more of that over the winter.
Yeah. Samantha, there'll be a question coming to you. But first, there's one here really for Brendan and for David. If it's accepted that chicory is lost after 2 years, has it already done its work by deeper rooting, opening up the soil? And do we need to think what's happening below the ground as not just simply on dry matter yield?
Yeah, so I guess the chicory is it's the predominant plant in those new swards, and for me that's weed competition is the main reason for that. We're not using post-emergent sprays. It's very aggressive at taking up space. I think, though, at the same time, it's one of the things that it's slightly different on farms to happens in trials. In trials, having the likes of chicory plants in there, they got a lower weed burden in the plots by having the extra diversity and the extra competition from chicory. On farms, I'm not sure that's seen, because we've heard from farmers already their testimonials in terms of weed burden being something they're very, very conscious of. So I'm not sure that works as well in a farm setting as it does. I think the pragmatic middle for me is with farmers is if you have a weed burden, I wouldn't consider a multi-species sward. I think I'd be happier with the farmer going with the grass only, dealing with the weeds, bring in the clovers and bring in the plantains and so on afterwards. I think that's a more sensible way of doing it. It's still a big investment. We want the long term from that. The chicory, I'm not sure whether it's really, look, it doesn't last more than 18 months. It's not going to be the weed prevention strategy, I guess, that I'd hoped for.
Just a comment on the below ground effect. I think you do see that even in year one, and that's not maybe guaranteed, but I've seen it in the end of the first growing season, the below ground effect. As to how long, if it only lasts for 18 months or 2 years, how long does that benefit to the soil last for beyond whenever the chicory is actually present? I can't answer that. But I think other species then have the opportunity to follow down through those fissures and cracks down into the soil.
Samantha, a couple of questions. I'll join them together. First one is, with a spring calving system, are you making use of clover in any of your swards? And secondly, the question was asked to the other farmers who were on the video, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the things that you would like to see addressed going forward?
Well, we're not currently using clover at the minute. We're on the farm 10 years, been dealing with reseeding the whole farm. Recently added another bit to the farm and have reseeded it, but we haven't included clovers. I've been following closely Ballyhaise. We've visited it twice since the clover has went in. I suppose I'm following the research, and a bit as it was mentioned earlier, I'm waiting to see the long-term outcomes of it. It's another investment, and we've made quite a few in the last while. I suppose we work hard. Grass is our focus on the farm. We've worked a lot in infrastructure on the farm and laneways and access. Heavy farm, so I suppose access to grass has been our main focus at the minute. I'm not ruling out clover. I'll keep following the studies and hopefully find that there are answers for clover on a heavier farm.
And the next bit was on a spring calving system. What further research, how would you like research to help answer any of the problems that you're encountering?
I'll be honest and say we have just recently, it's been a strange year for us on our farm. We were hit this year with TB. We lost 40 cows in between May and July. We were left unable to buy. We've actually now just been open to buy, and we've bought some autumn calving cows, which I think, going by everything we've heard today, and that was what we'd been thinking, was that we will now be able to graze better in the early part of the year. We've found that we've grazed over the last few years. We've done more grazing in February than we have in March. Obviously, on spring calving, we've only been starting to calve, second week of February, and that's when the weather has been suitable for grazing. And cow intakes are low, and we've found it hard to graze out with the animals. So I'm hoping with the batch of autumn calvers, we'll be able to make more use of the spring weather and get more grazed off in the early months of the year.
I'm going to be true to my word. There's a hand up. I said I'd take a couple of questions from the floor. There's one there, and then there's Timothy Morrow here.
Hi there. Thanks very much for the presentations. I just want to pick quickly up on a point that Brian McCarroll made earlier, right at the end of his video presentation. It was about resilience and utilisation. It's something I think we've missed today. We've focused quite a lot on yield. But when it comes to utilisation, there's not much point growing the grass. We can't utilise it. And this has been quite significant in my farm over the summer, and that I'm looking at swards. But when you turn the cows in, they're eating one mouthful and tramping 4 below the sward. So you end up with nitrous oxide emissions, additional ammonia emissions, and then you also get additional leaching. And none of that has really been touched on today. So my question is grass breeding, have we got it right? Or is the continuous focus on yield, and we've forgotten about what's below the ground? In a recent conversation with a European grass breeder, under questioning, they said to me they could increase rooting mass by 50%, but it would come with a yield penalty. Because of that, would never make a recommended list. So therefore, is the system under which grass breeders operate incorrect? And how as a farmer can pick a grass with a much bigger root mat that will create a much bigger root mat, and it might not be for the entire sward, but you include it as a farmer. I can choose to include it in a sward as to what that field conditions might be. So back to my question is, grass breeding, have we got it right?
Brendan or David?
Look, just to agree with the initial point in terms of above ground and below ground biomass, that they work against each other to some extent, that you're either driving energy into the biomass going up or the root depth and biomass down. So look, I suppose we're looking for both. There's no simple answer to that. So for me then, the extra plants coming in are the way to bring in that extra biomass below ground. Now, I didn't mention it in presentations in terms of nitrous oxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, or indeed in terms of methane or nitrogen leaching, but we are monitoring all of those aspects and attributes of these swards. But I think that it's too early to say in terms of determined impacts of that. Okay, it's a longer term process. But I do believe that we can improve below ground biomass by having extra plants in there. I'm not sure there's great potential, in terms of breeding perennial ryegrasses with a large abundance of below ground biomass while maintaining dry matter yield. I don't know where that variability is. I don't believe that's possible myself. Okay, New Zealand was mentioned as an example. I'm back from just over there in projects, and I mean they're having exactly the same problems we're having. I mean, they've documented new grasses lasting 3 and 4 seasons, and because of dry summers, disease prevalence, which are much bigger there than they are here. Their grasses aren't lasting any longer. In fact, they're not doing quite as well. So, and there's a big doubt among New Zealand farmers actually to invest in new reseeds. They prefer, as someone mentioned earlier, the old pastures that they had. So I don't think there's silver bullet solutions for any of that. I do think having plantains and so on in our swards on top of clover, we can build some of that below ground biomass, earthworm abundance and so on, the other attributes, and that'll deliver some of the benefits we want. But it's not going to be a silver bullet, I don't think.
David, any comment?
Just a quick comment. I totally take the point about grass breeding traits over the years have been quite narrow at the expense of some of these other maybe traits that would add to resilience of swards, grazeability, etc., anything else associated with roots. I should point out that the AFBI grass breeding programme has, albeit quite recently, started to refocus on some of those traits. But the problem is the statutory testing system right around the UK and maybe Ireland as well is largely focused on yield, digestibility and 1 or 2 other features. So until that bar is changed in some way, and these other what might be niche traits get a bit more airtime, the grass breeders, you couldn't blame them, the majority of them, for breeding for certain traits at the expense of resilience type traits like rooting and so on.
Going to stop. Tim, and this will be the last question, folks. I'm conscious of time, and I want to hand back to Jerry to conclude.
Thank you. As someone who's maybe put a few mixed species swards in over the last 4 years, one of my experiences that the ground is a bit drier, but I have gone to the extreme route of putting no fertiliser on those, which leads me to my question, and I'm wondering in Ballyhaise, are there any plans to trial the lower nitrogen against a zero nitrogen to see what the difference is? Because if you're top feeding, one thing for sure is it's not bottom feeding. So one does go against the other, so that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, there is no plans, immediate plans. We have 0N plots within the project, which allow us to as David showed for Hillsborough, to show the 0N potential grass production, exactly the same, that 4 or 5 ton dry matter production where you have no clover and, where just the background soil mineralization. So we're getting that 150 kilos of nitrogen turned over into soils every year, and we're capturing that. With clover in top of those swards, then obviously that's going to increase dry matter production. But yet our clover contents in February, March, April, on a heavier soil, they're going to be low contributions. So the nitrogen fixation from those is going to be also quite low. So for the moment, for those dairy systems which have a big demand for high quality forage early in the season, we are, as Sinclair mentioned earlier, we're going to be putting in nitrogen into those systems early in the season to drive on dry matter production, pasture quality, and relying then later in the season on the clovers to fix the nitrogen. That's where we'll make the saving. It is interesting to look at the 0N projects, it's no doubt. But at this stage, we don't, it's too far removed, I guess, from the level of productivity we need for these dairy systems.
Folks, I am going to bring I think I'm looking at, there were 35 or 36 questions come in there, so this could go on for an awful long time. We're already over when we said we would finish. But can I, on your behalf, sincere thanks to all those who have participated today, but they were speakers here this afternoon. Taro, David, Brendan, and also Samantha and Greg joined us on the panel, so thank you very much indeed.